Good afternoon, everyone across the country. I am Tim Phillips, President of Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for joining us for another one of our Facebook Live series with key Senate and House leaders who are fighting these policy threats coming out of Washington, D.C. And wow, they are fast and furious. I think about this, election bill, H.R. 1. I think about the PRO Act, which would devastate right to work. The first big spending bill, $1.9 trillion that they passed on a party line vote, I believe it was a few weeks ago. And now this next, in total conglomeration, around $4 trillion that Nancy Pelosi and Schumer and the president want to spend on a myriad of big government programs. Or trying to call it infrastructure. You and I know that's simply not true. It's Orwellian kind of language. Today we have, in all candor, I think the best senator up there, senator or House member, on trying to rein in the size and scope of government and the waste and the cronyism. And to introduce him is our Kentucky State Director, Mike Conway. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone, and hello, AFP Kentucky. I am coming to you live from sunny Perryville, Kentucky, which is in the central part of the state. This afternoon, I'm excited to welcome a true freedom fighter to our virtual AFP event, Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul is in his second term in the U.S. Senate and has not only been on the national stage in recent years, but is also at the forefront of the battle to stop out-of-control spending in Washington. Welcome, Senator Paul.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. And you got it. I am very, very concerned about the amount of spending coming forward. It's unprecedented. Even in normal times, this place runs about $1 trillion annual deficit. That's just the normal expenses. That would be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, and military. Adds up to about $1 trillion short just in the ordinary expenses every year. But add on to that in the last 2 years, an extra $2, $3, $4 trillion. We're really looking at somewhere between $6 to $8 trillion of debt added in a 2-year period. And as a percentage, this is greater than was added even in World War II. So this is historic. I don't think it will be without ramifications. If you watch the talking heads on TV, they're saying, oh, inflation is transitory. It's only going to be, it's pent up demand from the COVID epidemic. Perhaps, but I tend to think it's much more than that. I think there's been so much money flooded into the system that there already is generalized inflation of the stock market. But we're hearing it from small business people everywhere I go across Kentucky and across the country. They're saying two things. One, they can't find workers because the government's paying you too much not to work. But then they're also saying that throughout their supply chain, if you're a pizza store, the dough, the cheese, they're seeing price rises, significant price rises. And I think we're going to feel this all generally. And it's sort of the mysterious nature of people thinking you can give somebody something for free. So if you ask the public, were you glad to get $2,000 in a free check? And they're like, yes, surprisingly, that's popular. But if you ask them, whether it's a good deal at the end of the year, if their prices went up by $2,000 and they got $2,000, are they ahead? And it's harder to see the inflation and the gradual erosion of your income. But even in ordinary times, we've been having about a 1.7% inflation rate. But over 10 years, that's 17%. Are there people that over a decade don't get a 17% increase in their salary? So even with very small inflation, it's part of the reason why some people don't get ahead in our country. And it is sort of bread and circus. They offer you something for free and you say, well, sure, I'll take something for free. But nobody explains to you the fine print that there's sort of the seen and the unseen. And the unseen or the insidious is the inflation penalty that we get over time. And I think we're in the process of getting a bigger penalty for that, and perhaps an economy-wide slowdown that comes from inflation as well.
Senator, one thing along with the spending that you just detailed, this current tax and spend bill is just that, also a big tax increase. Can you talk a little bit about this tax package that's in here as well and the impact that it could have on the economy as well?
Yeah, the Democrats, if they end up going with a Democrat-only infrastructure bill, have offered several taxes to try to pay for some of this. It won't pay for it. It'll still add a significant amount to the debt, but it'll be doubly painful in that it'll injure the economy. So when you raise the corporate income tax, there's a direct correlation between that and unemployment or in shipping employment overseas. So when we raised or lowered the income tax from 35% for corporations down to 21, guess what? Corporations had hundreds of millions of extra dollars. Just in my little town in Bowling Green, Kentucky, we have the Corvette plant. We make the Corvette there. Well, I went to a celebration. They had 400 new jobs. And those new jobs came about because the company got to keep hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money by lower corporate taxes. So when you raise their corporate taxes again, it means the next expansion is further off, doesn't happen, or maybe those jobs are created in a country that has a lower income tax. But even worse than raising the corporate income tax is probably raising the capital gains tax. This is a tax on things you invest in, stocks or property or buildings or what have you. And they're talking about raising that from 20%. Some are advocating to 43%. If this were to happen prospectively, I think what you'd see is a massive sell-off because people have been thinking about getting out of the stock market will say, well, I might as well get out now because the penalty would be twice as much if I wait till next year. So it could precipitate one of the most massive stock sell-offs in history if it happens. Hopefully they won't be dumb enough to do that all at once, but if they do, I think it'll be profoundly bad for the economy. There's also other things they're talking about. They're talking about getting rid of what's called step-up basis. So if you inherited a farm from your grandparents and they bought it for $100,000 and now it's worth $1 million, they don't make you pay the taxes between $100,000 and $1 million, the appreciation. It starts with you. When you inherit it and it's worth $1 million, it's the appreciation in your lifetime. And if we get rid of that, a lot of family farms will be broken up because they won't be, a farm that was bought in the 30s, if you had to pay taxes on its current value, you'd have to break up most of these farms. There's a lot of bad ideas floating around there. There is a Republican light proposal, and I would be for some money to be spent on infrastructure if we were to take it from somewhere else in the budget. So for example, we spend $50 billion a year in Afghanistan. If you were literally to take that money and put it in infrastructure, I'd be for that. We spend $26 billion a year in foreign aid welfare. If you were to stop that and put that into infrastructure, I'd be for that. And I have one other plan that I promoted called the penny plan for infrastructure. And it would tell every department of government, you got to cut your budget by 1% just through sheer efficiency and savings. And then I'd put that in infrastructure. All of those different ideas could add up to something between 500 billion and even $1 trillion, but it would come from other parts of the budget. If we're just going to borrow it, some of the Republicans have proposed, well, we'll borrow it or we'll take it from the COVID money we already, spent. We'll sort of recycle money already spent. That's better than either new taxes or borrowing it, but I'm still a little concerned about how big that's going to be. My preference would be if the government has a role in infrastructure, it comes from our already huge budget and we take money away from places where we're spending it inappropriately.
And Senator Paul, I guess that brings up the next question. How much of the president's so-called infrastructure package is actually going to be spent on what folks traditionally think is infrastructure, roads and bridges?
The estimates are less than 10%. And this is sort of a crazy notion. You've never seen a wider, more expansive definition of what infrastructure is until you met these modern Democrats. These modern Democrats are calling free daycare, free healthcare, free college, free cars, you name it, whatever they can think of they want to give for free, they've been calling it infrastructure. We actually have one advocate in Kentucky who's saying that reparations for slavery should be infrastructure. So there's a lot of craziness out there. And there used to be some bipartisan agreement on what infrastructure was: roads, bridges, locks and dams, things that really are fundamental to the country and to transportation. But if we get into this wider definition, it just becomes pork barrel politics. And I'm alarmed at how much they're talking about. And even this week, look, half of our Republican caucus went along with Chuck Schumer and spent $250 billion by increasing the money to this agency, the National Science Foundation, that is probably the most wasteful agency in our government.
Ladies and gentlemen watching, now's an important moment to make your voice heard. You're watching from across the country and also in Kentucky. There's an I Volunteer link right there in the Facebook feed. Click on that. It'll take you about 1 minute and 15 seconds to make your voice heard to your House member and your 2 United States senators on this tax and spend policy package coming out of Washington, D.C. I would urge you to do that. It matters. And you may be thinking, well, gosh, my guys are the good guys. They're going to vote the right way, like Senator Paul. They need to be encouraged. They need to know that folks back home are watching and urging them on. And those who are, frankly, on the other side, you may be thinking, well, we're not going to change their vote. I can tell you, I used to work on Capitol Hill. Every member, Democrat or Republican, they keep a track on a daily basis of the number of folks from their district or state calling or emailing, contacting them, and what the issues they're contacting them are, and whether they're yes or no. They keep track of it. It gives them a sense of where the pulse is back home, and it matters. And it certainly matters to these House Democrats in swing districts, and frankly, to some wobbly Republicans that have to worry about that as well, because there are wobbly Republicans on this issue, unfortunately. But Senator Paul, would you take a moment and give folks a sense of, among your colleagues, why it does matter when there's a surge of contacts from back in a district or a state on an individual issue?
Oh, I'll give you an example. Last week with this bill, this $250 billion monstrosity that grew by thousands of pages of amendments, I was in the cloakroom and I was there with Mike Lee and Ron Johnson and some of the other people, the conservatives that were opposing this bill. And an establishment Republican walked in there and he said, "What are y'all doing? You're just keeping us here and you're not going to achieve anything. It's going to pass and you're never going to get your message out." And I looked at him and I said, "Look, in your state, the vast majority of people don't want this spending bill. This happened to be a senator, a Republican, who voted for impeachment." I also told him, "Look, in your state, most people didn't want you to vote for impeachment. You did anyway." And, he just got all huffy with me. And I said, "Look, the thing is that we are doing this because we believe in it. And the thing is that's what we need, is more principled Republicans. In fact, the reason we still have Obamacare, and I know you guys fought Obamacare like we did, the reason we still have Obamacare is not Democrats. We knew they were going to vote to keep it. It was 7 Republicans that voted to keep Obamacare in the Senate. A few of them are leaving, but we've still got a couple of them. And so the part of the problem is we've got to get people involved, in politics, calling their senator, calling their congressman. And it does make a difference when they hear a flood of this. This arrogant senator who said we weren't going to get anything done and nobody at home would know it. If people were to call, and let him know, I think all of a sudden we would find out. And they are afraid. They are afraid of the voters. They think they can get away with it only because the people at home don't know what they're doing. So I think a big part of what AFP does and can do is making sure the voters know, like the people who voted for this big, huge $250 billion boondoggle, 32 Republicans voted no, but 17 Republicans voted yes, and all the Democrats. But I hope that you'll make sure your members will know which members voted for this so they can call them and it can make a difference. And all of them have to be reelected. They should have to hear from their voters.
Senator Paul, it's something that's been on the minds of a lot of Kentuckians right now is right to work. AFP Kentucky was at the forefront of that fight here in the state. Currently there are 27 states that are right to work states. How is this infrastructure plan and part of the PRO Act going to impact that?
Well, the right to work movement, something I've long supported. My political director, Doug Stafford, worked in that movement for 15, 20 years. It's something we are very supportive of. It's made Kentucky a better place to have it. You find that if you're a right to work state, guess what? Businesses want to locate in your state. It is, if you look at the economies of the states that have right to work, they're all doing better on average than the states that are not right to work. So the Democrats have wanted to put in this PRO Act that would basically, nullify the right to work. And that would be a problem. The right to work has mostly occurred, at the state level. And this would be the federal government coming in and telling the states that their right to work laws don't apply. So it's a huge mistake. It's also Pandora's box for all kinds of lawsuits and everything else that they want to include in here. So it's a bad idea. And it's almost always a bad idea for the federal government to get involved in things that should be done at the state level anyway.
Senator, can you give folks an idea, those watching, and they're going to be watching more as this thing's on our Facebook page over the next few days, a sense of the timing legislatively of this current battle over the tax and spend packages out there? I know Nancy Pelosi came out just a couple of days ago and said, we want to get this thing moving to the House this coming week. Can you give us a sense of the inflection points in these next few days and weeks so that folks will know the timing they have to be involved on this?
As of now, I know of no Republican who will vote for the massive tax increases the Democrats are offering. There are one or two Democrats, Sinema and Manchin, who are holding out on the filibuster, on still having the filibuster and not giving the far left everything they want in their package. Really, what ends up coming forward, if it's a Democrat-only package, will be dictated by what's acceptable to those one or two Democrats that are holding out, because Republicans in all likelihood won't vote for the big package of enormous amounts of spending, most of which is not infrastructure. Now, there's a bipartisan approach that'll come out, and we'll see. I support the process. I don't know if I support the product yet, but we'll see what the bipartisan group comes up with. There'd been negotiations between President Biden and Senator Capito from West Virginia. Those have broken down in the last couple of days, but there's still some discussion going on between the Biden administration and about 10 Republicans and Democrats, although it looks like a list of all the people who voted for impeachment are the Republicans, but it's a better than an all Democrat bill, but we'll see what happens.
And Senator, you mentioned the filibuster. Can you briefly just tell us why that's so important? I know that some folks here in the state have talked about that, but they're really kind of curious about the significance.
Well, I like to think of it this way. You live in a natural state of freedom. You live in a natural state where you have God-given rights. Government comes in to protect those. But government comes in to do a lot more than just protect your rights. After a while, and really for decades now, they come in to do things to take away your rights. So it's a long way of saying there are more bad ideas than good ideas. So anything that can slow down the bad ideas from passing, anything that adds to the debate and to the obstacles to new legislation is good, because most new legislation actually either puts us further in debt or takes more of our freedoms away. So the filibuster slows down the rapid erosion of our rights. From another perspective, it keeps the country from going too fast to the left or to the right. You remember when President Trump was president and the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate? President Trump at that time was for getting rid of the filibuster because he said it slowed him down. He wasn't getting what he wanted. And he probably sent out 20 messages saying that. Now he's on the other side. But there were those of us who, even when we were in the complete majority, believed the filibuster was a good idea. I'm one of those, because I think there are more bad ideas than good ideas in Washington, and there's more spending ideas than lowering spending ideas. So the bottom line is, when you're in a city with a bunch of bad ideas, the less bad ideas that make it into law, the better.
So in talking on the tax package, there's also an irony occurring among Democrats and a couple of Republicans in the big tax states, but for the most part, it's among the Democrats. And that is their effort to eliminate the $10,000 cap on state and local tax, the deduction. The tax cuts that you and the Congress, the Republican Congress passed in 2017, and that then President Trump signed into law, did so many good things for this economy. And one of them, and one of the most fair things it did, was it capped at $10,000 the deduction that people could take for state and local taxes. Because if you live in Texas or Florida or even just a normal lower tax state, it's not fair to you, and it advantages the really big tax states like California and New Jersey and New York and Illinois. But now there's this caucus of 40 or 45 House and Senate Democrats wanting to get that cap lifted. And I noticed that one of the congressional agencies was saying that 86% of the money would go to people making more than $1 million a year, which is a tax cut for the rich, very narrowly drawn by these Democrats. Is that likely to throw a wrench into the efforts on their side on the tax bill?
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't know exactly. I don't know whether that caucus will follow through with what they're saying and not vote for a Democrat bill that doesn't fix the problem, because there's many allied on the Democrat side and the other side that don't want that to happen. So I think that caucus is still a minority of Democrats. I personally have mixed feelings on it, because if you give me an idea, a proposal to lower anybody's taxes, I'm almost always for it. I don't care whether you're rich, poor, or middle class. The rich pay most of the taxes in our country. The top 1% pay 40% of the income tax. The top 10% pay 75, 80% of the income tax. So really, when the debate was going on, and a lot of people don't know this, but when the tax bill came forward, they were talking about eliminating the deduction of your state income taxes completely. And so I came forward and talked to the president and said, if you do that, your tax cut won't be a tax cut for the vast majority of people between, let's say, 100 and 200,000, or between 80,000 and 200,000. That's a lot of the upper middle class of our country, because frankly, it's not just New York. I mean, I pay an income tax in Kentucky, Virginia pays an income tax, Michigan does. So, I mean, all the states pay income, not all of them. A lot of the states pay income tax. It may be a greater incentive, since this has happened, for people to leave these high tax states. Some would argue it's going to make them eventually make better policy. I don't foresee a time when New York, Illinois, or California make better policy. But if it accelerates the movement of people to the South or to the low tax states, that's good. But if you actually give me a proposal and say, would you increase it from 10 to 20,000? I'd probably vote yes, simply because I'm always for lower taxes. The way I look at it is there's a productive sector and the non-productive sector. The productive sector is the workers, everybody out there in the economy working. The government's the non-productive sector. So you don't want to give government, you want to give government the minimal amount. Another way to put this is sort of Thomas Paine said, or others have said, government's a necessary evil. So we have to feed it, but we should keep it on a very strict diet, and we should have very few things the government can do. And I think it's overfed, bloated, and obese at this point. And so any kind of diet we can put the government on, I'm for.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much. Well said, as always. Thanks for your leadership in the Senate. Mike Conway, for what you're doing with AFP Kentucky. And ladies and gentlemen, now is a wonderful opportunity for you to make your voice heard. I'm coming to you from the Pittsburgh suburbs, a hotel room here. We did a big event in Congressman Connor Lamb's district last night, urging a no vote on this tax and spend package. Tomorrow, I'll be in Ron Kind's district in Wisconsin, another one of those districts that's a swing district. And Congressman Kind, frankly, shouldn't be voting for all this stuff from Pelosi and Biden and all the big spending. And we're going to be in a couple of Republican districts the week after that, urging them to stand strong on spending and against bringing back earmarks and all this other cronyism that, frankly, we've seen some Republicans do in the past. So make your voice heard. Click on that I volunteer link. Do it. Let's make sure we get this country going in a freer and more prosperous direction. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Senator Paul.
Thank you.